Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about Russia's referendums in eastern Ukraine. Now, Russian election officials in Ukraine's occupied territories have claimed overwhelming support for unification with Russia in a series of swift referendums. Now, meanwhile, Kyiv and its Western allies have dismissed these referendums as a sham. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has told the United Nations General Assembly, that is UNGA, that Kyiv will not be able to negotiate with Russia further after Moscow held annexation referendums in 4 occupied Ukrainian regions. Russian President, on the other hand, Vladimir Putin, is expected to address his country's parliament about the referendums this Friday, and the referendum votes, which took place over 5 days amid ongoing fighting, is likely be used by the Kremlin to announce the annexation of large areas of eastern Ukraine. So for a detailed analysis of the ongoing situation there, and also to understand the implications of these Russia-led referendums in eastern Ukraine, we have with us a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with, we're joined by Professor Sanjay Kumar Pandey from the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies in SIS JNU. We also have with us Retired Lieutenant General Dr. Rakesh Sharma, Distinguished Fellow at VIF, and former Ambassador Anil Trigunayat is also with us. Welcome, all of you gentlemen, to Sansad Television. I'll begin with you, Ambassador Trigunayat, and let's start by, analyzing two aspects here. One, of course, there are two sides of the story when we're talking about the referendums which have been held. One is the Russian side, which have held the referendums in the areas occupied by it in eastern Ukraine. The other is from Ukraine and its Western allies. The key question here is how crucial and important are these referendums which have been held by Russia in the present circumstances?
Well, as you know, that one of the reasons that President Putin went in for his special operations was protecting these Donetsk region, where there is a predominance of the Russian-speaking or the Russian origin people who have greater salience towards Moscow. And so that was one of the main reasons, apart from denazification or whatever you may say. And this has been going on for quite some time. President Putin was wondering that there has been this Minsk agreements that have not worked out. The Ukrainians had not stuck to their own side of the bargain, which was that they will have autonomy provided to them. Instead, these some kind of, I would say, pro-Nazi kind of groups, which whom Putin calls like that, they were perpetrating some kind of atrocities on all these people. So that was one of the main reasons. Now, whether it is logical to do so or illogical to do so, we have seen in 2014, he annexed Crimea in exactly the same manner. And now they had recognized these two as independent republics, basically Donetsk, Luhansk, and Donetsk. Now, you just go back a little more. In 2008, we have seen the same thing when the Georgia war happened. At that time, Ossetia and Abkhazia were declared as independent republics on very similar this thing. So this is something that is a playbook that has gone on here. Whether the world recognizes or does not recognize, I don't think it makes any difference to Putin at this stage. But let us also see, how California was annexed in 1848 by the United States. From Mexico, or what is happening on the Falkland Islands between UK and Argentina. So there are various these similar kind of incidents in the history, but in 21st century, this is happening, of course. And now the United Nations Security Council also is going to discuss this, and very likely that will be vetoed by the Russians, and Chinese might abstain on that. But this is naturally annexation is some kind of a clear violation of the existing principles of the UN Charter, where the territorial integrity of Ukraine has been ensured. And it will definitely put a setback for the peace talks at all, if there were supposed to be any. And for the failure of these talks also, I think that Putin at the moment is left with few choices: either go out full-fledged war into Ukraine now and try to take whatever it is, because his basic objective was to create this kind of a corridor, and that he would be successfully doing. Secondly, since once it becomes the territory of Russia, he will be, in his own nuclear doctrine or otherwise, will be forced to defend those territories rather than defending autonomous regions or the countries that they had declared.
Okay. Professor Pandey, do you agree that this entire process of referendums which are being, which were rather held by Russia in these 4 regions in eastern Ukraine occupied by it during the course of, this 6 to 7 month old conflict between Russia and Ukraine, does this, further complicates the entire situation? Basically, Russia is trying to assert its position here. Is that what the indication is?
There is a provision, and it is believed that referendums are very essential for declaring independent statehood. But referendums have to be held in a certain condition. The condition should be peaceful. The political and civil rights of the citizens must be guaranteed. There should be objective criteria for the voters, and there should be international observers. The question is whether in this case all these criteria were fulfilled. Whether the condition was peaceful, obviously we know it was not. Whether the political and civil rights of all the citizens of that region was guaranteed, again there are questions. Whether international observers were there, no, obviously not. So this referendum is very, very questionable, and it complicates the situation not just for Russia. It complicates for Russia and Ukraine because it closes the door for peaceful negotiations. It creates problem because this can become a pretext for similar exercises carried out by other states. So it has created a very volatile and serious situation. And for countries like India, it poses a big dilemma and a matter of great concern.
Okay. That also is a very important aspect there. Lieutenant Sharma, from the security point of view, because this is an ongoing conflict, and of course there are rules and regulations per se with respect to referendums, as Professor Pandey was referring to, but what Ambassador Trigunayat was also pointing out, that it looks like, it makes this ongoing conflict more complicated. So in terms of the security scenario in the region, how do you think it is likely to move ahead? The Ukrainian president has already made it clear that his country will no longer be able to engage in peace talks with Moscow after these referendums.
Now, let me divide the issue into many parts. One is that these 2 regions can be divided separately. The region of Donbass, which is Donetsk and Luhansk, is one region which has been restive from the period of from 2014 onwards. There have been some kind of insurgency on. So that's one region where there is thing on. Second is the region which is Kherson and Zaporizhia. Now, this region, the Russians have no right at all. There is no claim. It's not even Russian-speaking population or ethnic Russian population. So there was no restiveness here. These are actually part of Ukrainian territory. So that's one part of the issue. Second is that none of these 4 oblasts are totally held by the Russians. In Donetsk, they have only 60% of the territory. In Kherson, they have about similar amount of territory. In Zaporizhia, they have very limited territory. So, you doing elections when the territory of the entire oblast is also not with you. And the issue of population. Large amount of population is internally displaced or migrated out. So the election is being carried out by only those old people and those who could not move out from these areas. So, the entire concoction looks not right. I would also like to state that we are coming to a point of no return. You go back to 2014 of the Crimea referendum done. The Russians are saying, look, nothing happened. People didn't recognize it. So what? It's ours. There was nothing. But in this present case, especially in the case of Kherson and of Zaporizhia, there are bound to be resistance. There have already been attacks being carried out in Kherson against the administrators which were brought in by the Russians in that area. And the resistance is already active inside Kherson and also in Zaporizhia. So, to say that in future it will be all peaceful, it will not be what happened in Crimea. This region will be restive for a long time. And if you add this with the mobilization that they have done and the nuclear signaling which is done by the President Putin, this is a time for actually getting into an issue of no return. There will be no settlement of the front, and there will be no settlement of the population there, causing more and more insurgency type situations in times to come.
Okay. Okay. Ambassador Gunayat, how do you view this in terms of, the forward movement? Because both sides have made it clear. Russians have held a referendum. President Putin is likely to address the parliament on this issue on Friday. Perhaps the process which, was adopted during Crimea's annexation, the same process will be followed, and this all will be done by the end of this week or early next week as well. On the other hand, Ukraine is crying foul. It says this is a sham referendum, and so are its Western allies. So from here onwards, given the situation, specifically the fact that there is an ongoing conflict between both sides, there is an armed conflict going on, do you see any room for a process of dialogue or a diplomatic process to take place here? What might be the next moves from both sides which can bring down or scale down the situation rather than taking it a notch higher?
Well, I think that at this moment, what is Putin is going to talk about in the parliament or while he's addressing, he has received a request from the administrator of Donetsk and Donbass and the Donbass region, Lugansk, and this to annex them. Now that is the request that he'll concede, and eventually they become partners, because they are saying that about 98% voters have in the referenda said that they would like to join Russia. Well, whether it's legitimate or not, we all know that it'll be very difficult for Russia to justify. But at the same time, what we are seeing, and that has been a major problem of the disintegration of Soviet Union, that there are populations of one or the other in different parts, and the Russia, Ukraine always were together, and especially the Western Ukrainians are more European in that sense of the term. So I see that there was no one tried really very sincerely to bring this conflict to an end. The Americans and the Western countries kept on, fueling it much more than there was a time when it was possible, and when even Zelensky had said that he would not join NATO. And they were agreed in Ankara that there will be coming to talks and decided on something. I mean, the red lines have kept on changing. The goalposts have been changing between both sides now. For the Putin, I think now at the moment, what I feel is for him, it is all out. He is not looking at any concessions from the West. Instead, there will be greater criticism, which is already coming. And we are going to see that there would be more sanctions, like Canada and others have said. But Russia has learned to live with the sanctions now. It is already looking at a very different kind of a scenario. On the contrary, Ukraine is in a very bad shape, and the world is continuing to suffer. So I don't see that in the near future there is any chance of this thing ending. Unless, of course, Putin unilaterally decides that, okay, I have achieved my objectives and I no longer want to go in attack. But then he cannot prevent the Ukrainians or the other insurgents trying to come and attack or retract these territories.
Okay, okay. Professor Pandey, two things here. One, of course, the strategic aspect of it, as Ambassador Gunayat was pointing out, that perhaps, one side will have to blink first, either Russia or Ukraine here. But also, for us to understand better the historic aspect of this, these traditional relations between, the people of Ukraine and people of Russia as well, the overlap, which is mostly always been cited by Russia, trying to justify the ongoing conflict and its claims over various, regions of Ukraine, which it has already occupied, or others as well.
Well, historically, Russia and Ukraine, culturally, historically, civilizationally, linguistically, in terms of religion, they share so much. But at the same time, the Ukrainians believe that apart from what they share, what they have in common with Russia, Ukraine also has other historical cultural experiences. Certain portions of Ukraine were in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, so which was more Europe-oriented. Similarly, certain portions were part of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and certain portions were there in Ottoman Empire also. So Ukrainians believe that they have a very varied historical cultural experience, though they share something in common with Russia also. In the last 100 years or so, the effort of Ukrainian nationalists has been to establish Ukraine's distinct identity, and based on that distinct identity, at times they have demanded right of national self-determination, which Russia has opposed. There was a time during the First World War, just after the Bolshevik Revolution, that some sort of independent statehood was created in Ukraine. Much before that, one can go to 17th century or even before that, when for 100 years or so, Ukraine existed as something like a semi-independent state, but with a very precarious independence. And in response to the great powers that surrounded Ukraine, the then leader of Ukraine, Getman Khmelnytsky, decided to seek protection of Russia, and therefore the Treaty of Pereslav was signed in 1654, and then Ukraine became a part of Russia. Of course, certain portions remain in Austria-Hungary and Poland. For the next 300, 200 years or more, Ukraine was part of Russia, initially as a semi-autonomous region of Russia, and subsequently much of that autonomy was diluted. Under the Soviet Union, Ukraine became a union republic which technically enjoyed certain autonomy, including right to secede. So in 1991, when the Ukrainians declared their independence, in many ways one can claim it was in accordance with the Soviet constitution. Since 1991, the effort of Ukraine has been to claim a distinct identity and to move closer to Europe. The reason being two. First, they believe that unless they distance themselves from Russia, their identity cannot be established as a distinct nation and independent state. Secondly, they believe that as part of Europe, they will be gaining in terms of economic assistance, prosperity, or creating a liberal democratic setup. So the arguments in favor of Europe has been these. Whereas Russia has always wanted that Ukraine, since Russia shares so much with Ukraine, the beginning of Russian state was in Kyiv, Kievan Rus. Therefore, they would like Ukraine to be part of Russian-sponsored organizations like Eurasian Economic Union. When the Ukrainians refused to be part of it and instead decided to move closer to Europe with a possibility of joining European Union, even NATO, that angered the Russians. And therefore, 2014 annexation of Crimea, where Russians have a very important naval base, and Crimea, don't forget, was part of Russia as late as 1954, when it was gifted by Soviet Union to Ukraine on the occasion of 300th anniversary of Ukraine joining Russia. So case of Crimea is somewhat different. Whereas the eastern Ukrainian provinces bordering Russia, Donetsk and Lugansk, they were called Novorus, New Russia, in the 18th, 19th century. And therefore Russians believe that they have a certain claim over these territories. But of course, when it comes to Zaporizhia and Kherson, their claims are very weak, as Ambassador Tirgunaev also pointed out. So it's a very complicated story where the Russians want to claim Ukraine historically and culturally, whereas Ukrainians want to establish their distinct identity and statehood.
That background, explains a lot about what has happened and what lies behind all these claims and counterclaims which are being made from both sides. Now, coming back to the strategic aspect to you, General Sharma, in terms of, what next? So, what can we hope? It's, as I was saying earlier, this is a situation where both sides are still engaged in a conflict. And it looks like off late that not much of a serious effort is being made from the either side to, come to the peace table, peace negotiations, or talking terms or diplomatic aspect of the situation. So strategically, what can we expect from either side?
Okay, see, one of the points that Russia was feeling that there will be large amount of ethnic Russian population or Russian-speaking population, especially in the areas of Kharkiv or Sumy, will rise up in favor of the offensives being carried out by the Russians, which did not happen. That's why, despite the fact whatever happened, Kharkiv as a city was not taken over by the Russians at all, because the people. It's like what happened in 65 war or 48 with Pakistan, or 71. Despite all the offensives being carried out in Cham, Jodi and so on, the local population never rose up. And so there is an ethnic nationalism, a Ukrainian nationalism, which the Russians miscalculated right from beginning, which is a very serious miscalculation. Now I would like to state is that there is the question to reply what you are saying. The fact is that, when any country which considers itself sovereign from 1991 onwards, also if you count, and their territories are taken away at this time, when these territories were administered by them, the population has intermingled, and the populations were also married across into these regions, to say that there are referendum carried out and these regions are now annexed across by in Russia, and then there is a possibility of peace talks. I think, we are asking too much. It is at this juncture, there is no face saving involved in this game for Ukrainians to say we will start talking and we accept a new line which is coming up in Kherson, or even the power plants, the largest power plant in Europe, Zaporizhzhia, taken over by them. It can't happen like this.
Okay.
Donbass is a separate issue, as Professor Pandey rightly said. But the areas which are astride the Dnipro River, which is Kherson and Zaporizhzhia, and to say that those are also been referendum carried out and things are the other side, there is no point of return into this one. Okay. This is going to be a protracted, asymmetric, irregular war that will follow in times to come in these areas. Donbass, I accept the point of view, maybe the Russians will be able to do something better and control that area. The fact is that the mobilization has to succeed. And the mobilization has to be effective in a manner that the Ukrainians do not propel further offensives into Luhansk and Donetsk. Donetsk, as it is, Russians are occupying only 60% of the area. So if they get further setbacks to this one, the annexation itself will go for a 6. So, and by the time they get the mobilized troops back into these areas, it will take time, training them, and So I think, strategically speaking, this is going to be a long drawn issue out here. Okay. To say that they will be able to freeze a borderline even in Donbass is not going to be easy and simple, especially because they obviously NATO officers are advising them, and there is a whole lot of information being provided, intelligence being provided by the Americans, etc. It's not going to be a simple proposition at all to seek any peace or talks or any common ground. I don't think it is possible now.
Okay. Thank you so much. There it is, Jan Sharma, Mr. Trigunayat, and Professor Pandey as well, for sharing your views and insight as our experts were explaining, the entire situation which has emerged due to Russia's referendums in the occupied territories of eastern Ukraine. And this is further complicated the ongoing conflict between both the countries. We'll keep a close watch on all the developments here and keep on bringing you all the details and more topics as well. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.